The night they left me to die, the wind carried no mercy. It howled through the endless grasslands like a mother who had lost her child. And beneath that crying sky, a newborn heartbeat fought against the silence of death. I was only hours old, yet even the stars turned away, unwilling to witness what humanity had done. That night, the bush was alive, not with life, but with memory. The tall grass swayed like restless souls whispering secrets to the moon, and the air was thick with the scent of rain and despair. Somewhere between the sighing of trees and the steady hum of crickets, a sound broke through, small, fragile, and trembling. A cry, not loud enough to command the night, but desperate enough to disturb it. Wrapped in a piece of torn fabric once meant for celebration, but now stained with earth, I lay upon the cold soil, my tiny fists curled against the chill of the world that had already rejected me. The night pressed down, heavy, and every passing minute felt like a question. Who leaves a child to die under the same moon that watches over kings? The bush shifted. From far beyond the horizon came the faint rustle of footsteps, cautious but deliberate. A hunter named Obi Okoro was making his way home, his bow slung over his back, his eyes tired from searching the forest for prey that refused to be caught. His village lay several miles away, but his spirit was heavier than his steps. He was a man running from memories, a wife taken by fever, a son lost to the same night sky. When he first heard my cry, he thought it was the echo of his own grief. It came so soft that even the wind seemed to swallow it. But it grew, again and again, like a wound that refused to close. He stopped, his hand tightening on his torch. The cry came once more, faint but unmistakably human. He followed it through the grass, guided not by sight, but by the pulse of something ancient, the instinct that binds all broken hearts to those more fragile than themselves. And then he saw me. Under the pale watch of the moon, a tiny bundle moved between the roots of a tree, my skin glistening with cold dew. But what froze him wasn't my smallness. It was the mark on my arm, drawn in charcoal and ash, shaped like a sun swallowing its own light. The symbol pulsed faintly, as if alive. Obi stood motionless. The stories of the elders crawled up his spine like whispers. Children born with the mark of ash bring ruin to those who touch them. Leave them where the spirits will take them. He looked at the mark, then at my trembling body. His hands shook, caught between fear and compassion. Lightning flickered somewhere in the distance, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw shapes moving in the trees, shadows too tall to be human. The forest itself seemed to breathe heavier, as though watching him decide. But when my cry broke through again, weaker now, he no longer saw a curse. He saw the ghost of his lost son, small, helpless, waiting for someone to choose him. He whispered into the darkness, "If I walk away, may the gods judge me too." He dropped his bow, wrapped me in his shawl, and lifted me. My crying stopped instantly, as if my tiny heart had finally found something it recognized. Warmth. He held me close, the rhythm of my breath against his chest syncing with his own heartbeat. And then, the forest changed. The crickets went silent. The wind turned warm and strange. From deep within the trees came a sound that did not belong to the night. A drum. Low, slow, ancient. It pulsed like a heartbeat too large to come from any man. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Obi froze, every muscle locked. The air shimmered with unseen movement, the way heat dances over sand. Between the trees, he thought he saw a flicker of firelight, though no fire burned. He turned toward the path home, holding me tighter. But the drumming followed, growing louder with each step. The sound was not random. It was rhythmic, ceremonial, calling something. Or someone. Ba-dum, ba-dum. His torchlight trembled in the wind. The dog waiting at his hut began to bark in the distance, a frantic, broken sound. The hunter began to run. Each footstep felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself tried to pull him back. When he reached his door, he stumbled inside and shut it, breath ragged, eyes wild. He placed me beside the fire, wrapped in clean cloth, and watched in disbelief as I stopped crying. My eyes opened, wide, calm, ancient. The flicker of flame bent toward me like metal drawn to a magnet. The drums outside fell silent. The dog whimpered once and hid. For a long moment Obi stood there, heart thundering in his chest. He whispered half in fear, half in awe, "Child of the ashes." "What are you?" But the baby, I, simply blinked. My gaze found his, and in that tiny, impossible stillness, the world felt as though it had shifted. Outside, thunder rolled far away. The wind carried a final echo through the crack of the hut's wooden door, soft, haunting, and unmistakable. Between the dying drumbeats, a voice rode the wind, not spoken, but felt, whispering through the trees. "She lives." They said the child came from spirits, that whoever touched her would curse their bloodline. But my mother touched me anyway, and that single act of defiance rewrote the story of my life. In a world where fear ruled louder than faith, she dared to choose love. And love, as I later learned, is the only weapon mortals have against the gods. The morning after I was found, the village awoke beneath a trembling sky, gray clouds hanging low, like hands uncertain whether to bless or curse. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the scent of yam and suspicion, for rumor had already outrun the sunrise. They whispered that a hunter had carried home a spirit child from the heart of the forbidden bush, a baby with the mark of the dead tribe carved into her skin, a baby whose cry could silence crickets and stir wind. By the time Obi stepped out of his hut, men had already gathered at his gate, their faces pale beneath their dark skin, eyes flicking toward the bundle in his arms. Mothers held their children closer, some muttering prayers, others clutching talismans woven from cowrie shells and fear. "You've brought death to our door," one woman hissed. "That mark brings only ruin." Obi stood tall, despite the trembling in his hands. "She's a child," he said quietly. "A child cries because it lives, not because it curses." But they didn't listen. The chief's messenger arrived before noon, his red scarf fluttering like a wound. "The council has spoken," he declared. "The girl must be returned to the bush before the spirits follow her scent here." That night, when the moon rose cold and heavy, Obi wrapped me in his old hunting cloth and walked away from the accusing fires of the village. His path led not toward the forest where I had been found, but to a small hut by the riverbank, the home of his sister, Mama Abeni, the widow whose courage was older than fear itself. Abeni met him at the doorway, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, her frame thin but unbroken. "Brother," she said, "what is this I hear about you defying the gods?" Obi said nothing at first. He simply placed the bundle in her arms. She looked down, and in that instant, the world seemed to still. The fire's reflection danced across my face. Her breath caught when she saw the ash mark curling along my tiny arm. "I've seen this mark before," she whispered. "I know," Obi said softly. "That's why I came to you." She looked up at him, half in fear, half in wonder. Then her voice hardened like steel. "The gods may own the sky, but they do not own my heart. If this child breathes, she deserves to live." And that was how Mama Abeni became my mother. Not by birth, but by defiance. The village mocked her for it. They called her mad. Children threw pebbles at her door. The chief warned her that death walks with spirits, but she only smiled and said, "Then let death learn what love tastes like." She named me Zara, meaning flower that grows through stone. She said it softly one morning as she bathed me in the river, the sunrise turning the water to gold. "You will grow where the world least expects it," she whispered. "You will not break." But the world did not forgive her kindness easily. I grew up beneath whispers and side glances, learning early that kindness can make people cruel. Women would spit near our path, muttering that the child of ashes should not drink from the same stream. Yet Mama Abini never bowed. Her laugh was thunder, her courage, fire. She taught me how to grind herbs, how to heal cuts, and how to read the silence of the night sky. "Zara," she would say, "every child is born for something. Maybe your mark isn't a curse. Maybe it's a map." Those words became my shield. Still, there were nights when fear crept through the cracks of our walls. Sometimes, as the wind moaned through the grass, the fire would flicker blue, and my mark would tingle with heat. I would hide my arm beneath my wrapper, afraid even of my own skin. Mama Abeni would sit beside me, humming old river songs until the fear went quiet. One stormy night, while thunder rolled like drums of war, I saw her watching the door, her brow furrowed. The rain lashed against the roof, the wind twisting like a spirit in rage. "Mama, what is it?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the doorway. The thunder cracked, white light flooded the room for a heartbeat. And I saw it too. A man, standing just beyond the rain, tall, motionless, cloaked in darkness. For a moment I thought he was a shadow born of lightning, until he raised his hand. The sleeve slipped, revealing a mark on his forearm. Not drawn, branded, the same as mine. Mama Abeni froze, her lips parted, but no sound came out. The man didn't move closer, he only watched. The rain fell harder, blurring his face until he vanished into the storm. Mama Abeni slammed the door shut, bolting it with shaking hands. Her breath came heavy. "He's gone," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her, trembling like a leaf in the mouth of wind. I touched her arm. "Who was he?" She looked at me, eyes full of something I'd never seen before. Not fear, not sadness, but recognition. "No one, my flower," she lied softly. "Just the rain playing tricks." That night, long after she thought I'd fallen asleep, I heard her outside. Her voice carried faintly through the rain. She was praying, not to the gods the villagers worshipped, but to something older, something that listened in silence. As lightning tore across the sky, a whisper answered her prayer, soft, chilling, almost human. "She is not yours to keep." And somewhere deep within the forest, the drums began again. The night it happened, the sky burned without stars, and the wind carried the taste of dust and warning, as if the gods themselves had come down to breathe upon our roof. The fire did not arrive like an accident. It came like a memory returning home, alive, hungry, and whispering my name through the cracks in the dark. That evening, the world felt wrong. The air was thick with silence, too still for a village that usually hummed with crickets and laughter. Even the river seemed to hold its breath, the water heavy and unmoving beneath the bruised sky. Mama Abani had been restless since morning. She kept glancing toward the forest as though she could sense something watching, her hands trembling whenever the wind touched the door. Inside the hut, I ground dried herbs while she mended the torn edge of her wrapper. Her movements were sharp, distracted, her lips moving in prayer. When I asked what troubled her, she only said, "The air smells of endings, tonight." I didn't understand, not then, that she had already felt the future shift. As dusk bled into night, the first spark appeared, not from our fire, but from nowhere. A glimmer in the thatch roof like the wink of an angry star. Mama Abeni froze, her eyes lifting slowly. The air around us thickened. Then came a faint sound, not a crack or pop, but a whisper, rising from the walls, curling through the smoke. It said my name, once, twice, then again, Zara. The sound was neither male nor female. It was old, like the sigh of the earth remembering something it had buried. The next moment, the spark bloomed into flame. It spread faster than reason, licking through the rafters, painting the walls in red and gold. Mama Abeni leapt to her feet, shouting for water, but the bucket had already overturned. The fire crawled toward me, slow at first, then with purpose, bending as though it could see. "Zara!" she cried. "Run!" But I stood rooted to the ground, unable to move. The heat pressed against my skin, and beneath the roar of burning wood, I could hear it again. The voice, closer now, layered within the flame. "You cannot hide from what you are." Mama Abeni pushed me toward the door, her wrapper catching a spark. The smell of burning cloth filled the air. I tried to drag her out, but the fire moved faster, circling us like a living creature. The roof began to crack. Sparks rained down like angry stars. "Zara, go!" she shouted, forcing me through the doorway. I stumbled into the night, choking on smoke. The sky was alive with red, our home a torch against the horizon. Villagers were shouting, some carrying buckets, others standing frozen. "The spirits have come for the cursed child!" someone screamed. "They are reclaiming what was stolen!" Their words sliced through me sharper than heat. My mark burned beneath my skin, glowing faintly, like a warning. I looked back. Mama Abeni was still inside. I screamed her name, tried to run back, but two women grabbed my arms. "You'll die if you go in," they cried. I tore free, falling to my knees. The sound of splintering wood tore through the air, followed by a blinding flash as the roof collapsed. Through the blaze, I caught one last glimpse, her silhouette framed by fire, her arms raised as if cradling invisible air, her face calm, proud, unafraid. For a heartbeat, she looked like the gods she had defied. Then the flames swallowed her. The world around me dissolved into chaos. The villagers backed away, whispering prayers. The wind carried ash across my skin like falling snow. At that moment, the fire spoke again. This time, not from the hut, but from within me. It filled my head with heat and noise and grief that didn't sound like my own. "Run." I obeyed. I ran into the night, barefoot, my legs cutting through the tall grass. The forest opened its arms to me once more, the same wild cradle that had once tried to claim my life. I ran until the flames were only memories flickering behind my eyes. I ran until the earth itself seemed to shift beneath my feet. When exhaustion finally caught me, I fell by the river, the mud cool beneath my burning skin. My breath came ragged, the world spinning in circles of light and shadow. The smell of smoke clung to me like guilt. Somewhere between waking and sleep, I heard footsteps, steady, measured, unfamiliar. Through my fading vision, I saw them. Men in dark uniforms, their boots heavy, their lanterns glowing like captured suns. One of them knelt beside me, his hand brushing the soot from my arm. His eyes widened when he saw the mark glowing faintly under the dirt. He looked over his shoulder and whispered, "We found her." The others froze. One reached for his radio, another raised his torch. And as darkness finally pulled me under, I realized the fire had not been trying to kill me. It had been trying to lead them to me. In that place, we didn't have birthdays, only numbers that told us how easily we could be replaced. The walls smelled of bleach and sorrow. The floors carried the weight of footsteps that had forgotten where they came from. And every night, the wind that passed through the barred windows whispered the same cruel lullaby. You are no one, and no one remembers you. When I woke, the first thing I saw was white. White walls, white sheets, white ceiling. The kind of whiteness that doesn't mean purity, but emptiness. My body ached, my mouth dry, my head pounding with the echo of voices that weren't mine. For a moment I thought I had died and entered the land Mama Abeni used to speak of, where spirits drift through the mist waiting to be named. But then a door slammed, and the spell broke. A woman entered, tall and sharp-faced, her uniform so stiff it looked painful to wear. She moved like someone allergic to softness. "You're awake," she said. not looking at me. Her voice clipped and cold. "Drink." She handed me a cup of water that smelled faintly of rust. "Where am I?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She only wrote something on her clipboard and turned away. "Rest. You'll need it. Orientation starts tomorrow." That was the first lie, because rest never existed there. The place was called St. Ijoma Center for the Welfare of War Orphans, but no one there used that name. We called it the Orphanage of Forgotten Names, because the moment you entered, your old self vanished. They cut your hair, burned your clothes, and gave you a number. Mine was number 47, black ink stamped across my wrist like a verdict. The days were long, ruled by bells and silence. We woke before dawn, ate tasteless porridge under the watch of soldiers, and marched to classrooms where lessons were less about learning and more about obedience. The older children had already learned the rules. Don't speak your old language, don't ask about the outside world, and never, ever show weakness. Those who broke, them paid with pain. I saw it on my second day. A boy no older than 8 muttered a prayer in Yoruba before eating. The matron's hand cracked across his face before the words had finished. "We speak the language of order here," she hissed. "The past breeds disobedience." His lips bled, and still he whispered the last line of his prayer. That night, they made him scrub floors until dawn. It didn't take long for me to understand that kindness was currency too expensive to spend here. So I stayed silent, watching and learning. My mark, the curling symbol on my arm, was hidden beneath a bandage. When one of the attendants noticed it by accident, her face went pale as ash. "Cover that," she said quickly. "Don't let the matron see. She hates strange things." I obeyed, but the mark had begun to change. Sometimes it tingled when the bell rang. Sometimes it burned faintly under the moonlight leaking through the window bars. The matron, whose name we were forbidden to say, seemed to sense it. Her eyes always found me during inspections, as though my silence offended her. "You think too much, 47, she would sneer. "Thinking is dangerous for girls like you." But I couldn't stop. I remembered things too clearly. Mama Abeni's songs, the fire that spoke, the voice that called my name. And I began to notice details others ignored. The pattern of patrols, the hidden rooms behind locked doors, the coded documents on the matron's desk stamped with military insignia. Something about this place felt less like a home and more like a test. Despite the fear, my mind sharpened. During lessons, I answered questions the teachers never expected. I could read faster than the older children, memorize maps after a single glance, fix broken radios using scrap wire. The matron noticed. Instead of praise, her suspicion deepened. "That one," I overheard her whisper to a soldier once, "has too much knowing in her eyes." Some nights I would lie awake, tracing the bandage over my arm, listening to the hum of the generator and the muffled sobs of children trying not to be heard. I wondered if the gods had placed me here as punishment or preparation. Either way, I couldn't forget what the fire had said. You cannot hide from what you are. Then came the morning that changed everything. The air felt heavy before dawn, thick with something unspoken. The matron stood by the gate long before the bell, her posture stiff, her smile too bright. A distant rumble echoed down the red dirt road. The sound of an engine. The children froze, watching as a black military car emerged from the fog, its body polished until it reflected the rising sun like a blade. 2 soldiers stepped out first, their boots sinking into the dust. Then a third, taller, wearing dark glasses, face unreadable. The matron hurried forward, nervous, wiping her palms on her skirt. One of the soldiers handed her a file. She flipped through it, then turned to the dormitory, where we stood lined in rows. Her gaze locked on me. "Number 47, she called. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying fear. "They're here for you." The soldiers' boots echoed as they approached. One extended his hand, not with gentleness, but command. "Get in the car," he said quietly. "Orders from above." I hesitated, feeling the mark on my arm begin to burn beneath the bandage. As they led me toward the gate, I glanced back once. The other children were watching in silence, eyes wide, faces pale, as if they already knew what I didn't. Whatever waited beyond that car wasn't rescued. It was destiny to wear a uniform. They promised to make us strong, but strength born from fear is another name for pain. And in that place where screams were measured like breathing, we learned that the body can survive long after the soul begins to die. The black car drove for hours through roads that twisted like snakes through the bush. The windows were tinted so dark that day and night blurred together. Only the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of a radio broke the silence. The soldiers said nothing. I tried to count the turns, to remember the path, but exhaustion turned everything into haze. When we finally stopped, the air that hit my face smelled of rain, metal, and something else, something sterile, unnatural. We had arrived at what they called the rehabilitation compound. But the children who'd come before whispered another name, the House of Experiments. The building rose from the ground like a wound, tall concrete walls crowned with barbed wire, its paint peeled by years of silence. The gates opened with a sound like a sigh that had forgotten mercy. Inside, the lights were too bright, the floors too clean, the corridors too quiet. The sound of our bare feet on the tile echoed like ghosts trying to remember footsteps. They separated us by age. Some cried. Others stared blankly ahead, already gone somewhere far inside themselves. The guards moved like machines. No emotion, no names, only numbers stitched on their sleeves. When I asked one where we were, he muttered, "You're where they fix broken things." But we weren't broken. We were chosen. Days bled into weeks. They made us run, fight, memorize symbols and songs we didn't understand. They fed us just enough to keep our hearts beating. When one of us collapsed, the others were told to watch. "Pain is a teacher," the instructors said. "Listen closely, and you'll learn how to live forever." The facility smelled of chemicals and sweat. Every wall hummed with machines that recorded our sleep, our dreams, even our silences. We wore white uniforms, our names erased, replaced by codes. Mine was a Z-47. At first I tried to resist. I refused to repeat their chants. I refused to forget Mama Abini's songs. But resistance had a cost. They put me in a cold metal room filled with the sound of static that never stopped. "You'll learn obedience," the voice over the intercom said. "You were born for something greater." What they didn't understand was that I wasn't afraid of pain anymore. Pain was the first language I'd ever learned, the language of survival. So I endured. And in endurance, I grew strong. Soon they began to notice. My pulse stabilized faster after each test. My mind adapted to puzzles meant to break concentration. They watched me through glass, whispering behind clipboards. One of the scientists, a tall man with silver hair and a scar across his brow, studied me longer than the rest. His badge read, Dr. Kasongo. One day he called me into his office. "You're different," he said, voice too calm to be human. "You don't resist like the others. You transform." His eyes drifted to my wrist, where the mark still glowed faintly beneath the skin. "Tell me, do you feel it calling you?" I didn't answer. His smile was small, cold. "Good. You will soon." That night, sleep refused to come. The air in the dormitory was heavy with whispers and fear. I lay still, pretending to dream, when two guards entered the hall, arguing in hushed voices. "She's not ready," one said. "The mark's unstable." "The colonel doesn't care," the other replied. "She's the key to the Bloodline Project. Without her, none of this works." Their words burned deeper than any injection. I waited until their footsteps faded, then crept from my bed and followed the glow leaking from Dr. Kasongo's office. Inside, papers were scattered across the desk, illuminated by a single lamp. I searched quickly. my hands trembling, my breath shallow, until I found it. A thick file stamped in red ink, Project Rebirth. Subject ZID-47. Beneath the heading was my photograph. Younger, smaller, wrapped in the same torn cloth from the night I was found in the bush. The mark on my arm pulsed as if alive, the same rhythm as the heartbeat echoing in my ears. And as the light flickered above me, I understood the horror hidden beneath those words. They hadn't rescued me from the fire. They had been waiting for it to deliver me to them. Freedom didn't open its arms to me. I tore through its ribs to get out, bleeding and breathless, dragging behind me the weight of every scream, every experiment, every name they took from us and buried under the word obedience. That night, freedom wasn't a door. It was fire wearing my heartbeat. I was 15 when I decided I would no longer die slowly. The walls had taught me how to count time by pain, how to breathe through fear, how to listen to silence until it cracked. But that night, as the storm gathered outside and the fluorescent lights flickered like nervous stars, something inside me refused to stay caged. The discovery of Project Rebirth had burned through me like acid. I could still see my photograph on that file, my baby face marked with numbers that erased my humanity. They didn't see a girl. They saw a blueprint. I spent nights memorizing patrol shifts, studying alarm systems, and tracing the rhythm of the facility's power grid through the hum in the walls. I wasn't alone. There were others who still dreamed beneath their fear. Lena, a soft-spoken girl with lightning-fast hands, and Toby, a boy whose silence could hide in shadows. We met in the laundry quarters, whispering plans between the hiss of steam and the clang of pipes. Every word we spoke was a crime. "They think they own our breath," Lena said once, her voice shaking. "Let's make them choke on it." The opportunity came wrapped in thunder. The storm outside cut through the electric fence, plunging parts of the facility into darkness. The alarms glitched. Guards stumbled through the rain, radios buzzing with static. Toby slipped the stolen keys into my palm. Cold, trembling metal that smelled like the future. "Once we open that door," he whispered, "we don't stop running." We moved like ghosts through the corridors, our white uniforms turning gray with mud and rain. My heart pounded so loud, I thought the walls could hear it. Each turn was a memory. The testing rooms, the glass chambers, the hallway where children screamed in dreams that weren't theirs. I swore I'd burn it all before letting them take another child. When we reached the main gate, the power surged back. The siren screamed to life, red lights flooding the walls. Guards shouted. Bullets split the rain. The air turned to thunder. "Go," I yelled. Lena sprinted first, her hair whipping behind her like fire in the wind. Then came Toby. But as he reached the fence, the ground exploded beside him, a mine hidden under the mud. The blast threw him backward, smoke swallowing his body. I screamed, but Lena dragged me forward. "He's gone, Zara," she cried. "He's gone." Grief and rage fused into something primal. I grabbed the torch from a fallen guard and hurled it into the supply shed. The fuel tanks caught instantly, flames leaping high into the rain. The explosion ripped through the compound. Alarms died, lights burst, and chaos took shape. Through the inferno I saw soldiers chasing us, faces lit by gunfire, voices swallowed by storm. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. The world narrowed to rain, smoke, and survival. Lena stumbled, her ankle twisted. I turned back, reaching for her, but before I could pull her up, hands grabbed her from the shadows. A guard's voice cut through the chaos. "We can still save you, girl. Tell us where she's going." Our eyes met one last time, her tears mixing with rain, her lips trembling as she whispered something I couldn't hear. Then the guard nodded, speaking into his radio. Betrayal is quieter than death, but it cuts deeper. I ran until the compound became a glow behind the trees, until my lungs begged for mercy. I didn't know where I was going, only that I could never go back. The storm began to ease, leaving behind a silence that felt too clean. I collapsed beneath an ancient tree, its roots gnarled like old hands gripping the earth. My body trembled, half from cold, half from disbelief that I was still alive. The moon broke through the clouds, spilling silver light across the bark, and that's when I saw it. Carved into the trunk, faint but unmistakable, was the same emblem from my birth cloth, a circle of fire around a flower. As the wind moved through the branches, the symbol began to glow softly, like a heartbeat answering my own. I reached out, my hand shaking, and whispered into the dark, "Who are you waiting for?" The night didn't answer, but the ground beneath the tree trembled, as if the earth itself had just heard my name. I thought I'd found safety, but safety is just silence wearing a mask, soft enough to make you rest, quiet enough to make you forget that even peace can have teeth. The forest had wrapped me in green shadows and warm earth, but beneath its calm breath, I could still feel the eyes of something ancient watching, waiting, remembering. When dawn broke, the forest no longer looked like a hiding place. It looked alive, humming with whispers that didn't belong to wind or bird. My body ached from running, my throat raw from smoke and rain. Yet as I sat under that glowing tree, the mark on my arm pulsing faintly in rhythm with the emblem on the bark, I felt an invisible thread pull at my soul. Not danger this time, but recognition. I followed that pull deeper into the forest. The light dimmed to gold as the canopy thickened, roots rising from the ground like veins of sleeping giants. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing that smelled of smoke and herbs. Huts built from clay and woven grass circled a massive fire pit. Women in bright wraps pounded yam. Children darted between goats and smoke. But when they saw me, everything stopped. Their eyes widened, not in curiosity, but fear. One dropped her basket. A man shouted in their language, words that sounded both warning to disbelief. "Idon, return!" Before I could speak, several men surrounded me, spears gleaming. I raised my hands. "I mean no harm." But my voice cracked, and they froze not at my words, but at the sight of my wrist. The bandage had slipped, revealing the faint glow of the mark. A ripple of whispers passed through them. Then an old woman stepped forward, her back bent, but her presence vast, her eyes clouded yet bright with memory. She carried a staff, carved with symbols that matched my mark. "Who are you?" she asked, in a voice that felt older than the trees. "My name is Zara," I whispered. The name seemed to tremble in the air, as though the forest itself recognized it. The old woman nodded slowly, then turned to the others. "Bring her. She walks with the blood of the beginning." They took me to their village, a place hidden from time itself. They called it Olwoma, meaning the heart that remembers. It lay deep within the jungle, protected by rivers and myth. Here the people spoke softly, moved slowly, and lived by the rhythm of drums and stars. The elders examined my mark by the firelight that evening. They murmured among themselves, their voices like the rustling of dry leaves. One of them, the chief, spoke finally. "This mark," he said, touching it gently, "belongs to the lost bloodline, the Embele, healers of the land. They vanished when the wars began, hunted by those who feared their power." I listened, each word tightening the space in my chest. "What power?" I asked. The chief's wife, a frail woman with silver hair braided with beads, leaned forward. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw both kindness and grief. "You carry the gift and the burden," she said. "Your blood remembers the song that can mend what man has broken, the land, the mind, the spirit. That is why they hunted your kind. They wanted to turn healing into control." The fire crackled, throwing red light over her face. "The mark glows when your destiny stirs," she continued. "But beware, the same blood that can heal can also destroy, if it forgets mercy." That night, I lay in a small hut, listening to the hum of crickets and the distant beat of ritual drums. For the first time in years, I felt safe enough to close my eyes. But my dreams were not peaceful. I saw flashes of the facility, faces of the lost children, the fire swallowing Mama Abeni's voice. And through it all, I heard the same whisper I'd heard as a baby beneath the moon. "We are not done with you yet." When morning came, the sky was bruised with smoke. The air carried the metallic taste of danger. Dogs barked in the distance, not the bark of warning, but of terror. The chief rushed out, shouting in his language. I followed him to the edge of the clearing, where the trees shook under heavy footsteps. Soldiers. They emerged from the forest line, rifles raised, boots slicing through the ferns. Their uniforms bore a new insignia, the same emblem that had glowed on the tree. But what froze me wasn't their numbers. It was the man leading them. He raised his weapon, the barrel glinting under the morning light, and on it, carved deep into the metal, was the same tribal symbol that marked my birth. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The chief whispered, trembling, "The hunters have found the healer." And as the first shot echoed through the forest, I finally understood. They weren't coming to capture me. They were coming to finish what the fire had begun. When the truth finally found me, it didn't whisper. It roared like a lion that had waited 20 years to be heard. It came not as comfort, but as a storm tearing through everything I thought I knew about myself, about my mother, about the fire that had tried to kill me, but had only ever been trying to wake me up. The first gunshot never reached me. The chief's guards pushed me into the sacred hut, sealing the entrance with woven mats. Outside, I heard the chaos of shouting, the sharp crack of rifles, the shatter of clay. Smoke crawled through the gaps in the walls, curling like frightened fingers. I pressed my ear against the cool earth, listening as the seer's chants rose above the gunfire, her voice trembling, yet defiant. When silence finally fell, it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that comes after too much has died. I pushed the mat aside and stepped into a world painted in ash and grief. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt wood and blood. The soldiers were gone, leaving behind footprints that led back into the forest. The chief knelt beside his fallen people, his lips moving in prayer. Only the old seer stood tall, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes bright with something beyond pain, knowing. "Come," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "It is time you learned what they've been killing to keep buried." She led me away from the ruins to a grove at the edge of the village, where a single tree stood taller than the rest, its trunk carved with hundreds of names. Beneath its roots, the soil was soft and dark, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. "This," she said, resting her palm on the bark, "is the memory of the lost." I looked at her, uncertain. "What am I?" Her gaze softened. "You are what they feared most. Truth wearing flesh." She motioned for me to sit. "Long ago, before the generals and the guns, there was a movement, a fire born not from anger, but from love. Your parents, Nkem and Adana, led it. They were teachers, healers, revolutionaries who believed that power without compassion is corruption wearing a crown. They carried this symbol," she pointed to my wrist, "the mark of Mbele, the bloodline of the restorers." My chest tightened. "Then why did they call it witchcraft?" "Because the truth threatens liars," she said quietly. "The government feared the Mbele. They erased your parents' names, burned their writings, hunted their followers. They told the world your people were heretics, not heroes." Her voice trembled now. "The night your parents were taken, they tried to protect their work. The formula that could heal the poisoned rivers, cure the soil after war. Your mother, she hid you. She wrapped you in the cloth of their symbol and sent you into the forest, believing that one day, the bloodline would rise again through you." The world around me blurred. I could smell the smoke of that long-ago fire, hear the cries of the night I was born. My mother. She died in that fire, I whispered. The seer shook her head slowly. The body burns. The spirit travels. The fire that found you as a child was not death. It was the echo of her will. You've felt it, haven't you? The warmth in your arm, the voice that calls your name in dreams. That is her. Tears slid down my face. She's still with me? The seer smiled faintly. A mother never leaves what she gave life to. Her strength lives in your bones. Her voice lives in your fire. I looked at my mark, glowing faintly under the dying sun. The lines pulsed like veins, alive. Every scar I'd carried, every wound, every burn, had been leading me here. Then everything they did, all the pain, was to bury her truth. The seer nodded. And you, child, are the shovel meant to uncover it. For a moment, silence wrapped us like cloth. Only the wind spoke, carrying the scent of ash and memory. Then she reached into the folds of her wrapper and drew out something small. A rusted metal pendant, its chain broken, its surface etched with the same circle of fire symbol. She held it out with both trembling hands. This, she said, placing it into my palm, was your mother's. She wore it the night they took her. The pendant was still warm, though it had been buried for decades. As I closed my hand around it, the mark on my arm flared, bright enough to light the trees. And somewhere deep in the forest, as if answering the glow, drums began to beat. Slow, distant, but growing louder, as though history itself had just woken up. I didn't go back to the city to live. I went to finish the story they tried to erase. The streets that once spat me out had forgotten my name, but not my shadow. I returned not as a victim, but as a whisper carried by the wind, slipping through alleys, markets, and the memories of those who once watched a barefoot girl dragged through the dust. I came back to rewrite what they had buried, with truth sharp enough to cut through silence. The city hadn't changed. It still smelled of diesel, sweat, and lies. Skyscrapers of glass rose beside crumbling slums, like gods pretending not to see their own decay. Billboards flashed slogans of unity, progress, and peace, words that sounded beautiful until you remembered how much blood had been spilled to paint them. I arrived under a false name, wrapped in an identity built from forged papers and fragments of history. To the world, I was Nia Okwu, a health volunteer working with local charities. But beneath the surface, I carried something far more dangerous than any weapon: the truth. The pendant the seer had given me never left my neck. Some nights, when the city went quiet, I could feel it hum faintly, as if alive, syncing with the rhythm of my heartbeat. That was when I began hearing her voice again, my mother's, not in words, but in impulses. Go here, speak to them, write their names. The instructions came like wind through tall grass, invisible but impossible to ignore. Through whispers and secret notes passed in marketplaces, I found them, the ones still brave enough to remember. Disguised journalists, dismissed scientists, soldiers who had seen too much and could no longer serve their silence. Together, we built a network under the surface of the city, a pulse moving through its veins. We called ourselves the Circle of Rebirth. Our headquarters was an abandoned printing press near the harbor, its walls still stained with ink and rebellion. There, by the flicker of kerosene lamps, we gathered stories from survivors of the orphanage, from soldiers who had transported subjects, from mothers whose children vanished under government health programs. Every testimony was a thread, and I wove them carefully into a tapestry of truth the regime could no longer deny. At first, we shared them quietly. Folded papers slipped under doors, radio broadcasts disguised as music, coded graffiti sprayed across underpasses. The symbol of the mbele, the circle of fire around a flower, began to appear on city walls. Some thought it was art, others whispered it was a prophecy. But for those who remembered the old days, it was a signal. The bloodline had returned. Fear traveled faster than fire. Government patrols tore down our marks by day, but by night they multiplied. The people had found something they hadn't felt in years: belief. I watched strangers pause before those walls, their faces lit by streetlight and hope. It was no longer about me. It was about what my mother had started. Still, danger moved in every shadow. Informants lingered in markets, spies disguised as beggars. Once, as I left the printing house, I caught sight of a familiar emblem carved into a soldier's rifle, the same one I had seen in the forest. They hadn't stopped hunting. They had only learned to wait. One night, as the rain lashed against corrugated roofs, our group huddled around a battered radio, waiting for our latest broadcast to air. The frequency had been changed at the last minute. Only a handful of us knew it. But before the transmission began, the radio hissed, and a voice, calm, official, cruel, filled the room. "Attention, citizens. A state alert has been issued for a national threat. Her name is unknown, but she carries a mark of rebellion, corruption, and danger. If you see her, report immediately. She calls herself the voice of truth. We call her by what she truly is: an enemy of peace." The room went silent. My stomach turned cold. Then the radio crackled again, and an image flashed on the small, flickering TV in the corner. Grainy, but unmistakable. It was me. The photo had been taken that morning in the marketplace, my hood half fallen, the mark on my wrist faintly visible beneath the fabric. Beneath the image, in bold red letters, it read, "The others looked at me." Fear, awe, loyalty all blending in their eyes. I reached up, touching the pendant at my throat. The hum had turned into a pulse, steady and loud. "They've finally remembered me," I whispered. Outside, sirens wailed through the rain. Inside, the fire that had once tried to consume me began to burn again. Not for destruction this time, but for awakening. They called me a criminal, but the only thing I ever stole was their silence. The silence that had buried our dead, fed our tyrants, and wrapped the truth in flags until no one dared to touch it. I didn't surrender because I was broken. I surrendered because sometimes, to be heard, you must let them build your cage and then burn it down from within. The morning they caught me, the city didn't roar. It held its breath. My name had become a ghost, painted on walls, whispered in songs, prayed over candles. When the soldiers surrounded the safe house, I didn't run. I simply stood, raised my hands, and watched the fear in their eyes as the mark on my arm glowed faintly beneath the rising sun. They expected a fugitive. What they saw was prophecy walking into chains. The ride to the capital was long and suffocating. From the van's narrow window, I saw the streets lined with people, not cheering, not spitting, just watching. Some clutched their wrists where my symbol had been drawn in ink or ash. It was spreading faster than their soldiers could erase it. They took me to the High Court, a building of white marble, its pillars tall enough to look holy, its floors polished enough to reflect lies. My trial was to be public, broadcast live across the nation. The regime wanted to humiliate me, to make an example of rebellion. But they had forgotten what happens when truth is given a microphone. When I entered the courtroom, the air was thick with cameras and judgment. Ministers filled the front rows, military officers behind them, and beyond the barrier, citizens who had fought for seats just to witness what they called the trial of the marked girl. The judge's gavel struck once. "State your name." I looked up, my voice calm but heavy with everything I had carried for 20 years. "Zara Adana Nkem, daughter of the fire, child of the land they tried to poison." A murmur spread through the room, like wind through dry grass. The prosecutor rose, a tall man with eyes as sharp as blades. He accused me of treason, terrorism, and the spreading of anti-state propaganda. Each word was dressed in authority, but reeked of fear. When he finished, he smirked. "Do you deny these charges?" I stood, The chains on my wrists clinked softly, like a rhythm waiting to be born. "No," I said. "I do not deny them, because your system makes the truth a crime." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge banged the gavel. "You will speak only when permitted." But permission had never built revolutions. I took a deep breath, the pendant warm against my skin. "You call me a traitor, because I refuse to kneel. You call me dangerous because I remember the names you buried. You call me cursed because my blood carries what your greed could not buy: compassion. You tried to break us with fear, but you only taught us how to rise through pain." The hall trembled under the weight of my words. People leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. Somewhere in the back, a guard lowered his gun, just slightly. I continued, voice steady. I was born in fire, raised in silence, trained in pain. But I learned something the day I escaped your cages, that truth does not die in darkness. It waits, it grows, it finds a voice, and when it speaks, no wall, no bullet, no flag can silence it. By the time I finished, the room had changed. Even the judge's hand trembled where it rested. The prosecutor sat frozen, his lips thin and pale. Then someone, a young clerk, no older than I had been when they took me, slowly rolled up his sleeve. There it was, my mark, drawn in black ink, trembling but visible. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, the entire crowd, from guards to bystanders, had rolled up their sleeves. Arms marked with the same symbol that once branded me, cursed. The judge shouted for order. Soldiers pushed forward, but it was too late. The movement had entered the room. The air itself vibrated with something alive, unity. I smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. "You cannot jail what already lives inside your people," I said quietly. "Even if you kill me, I have already multiplied." The judge slammed the gavel again, his voice breaking. "Remove her." They dragged me toward the corridor. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing not defeat, but defiance. The hallway smelled of metal and sweat. My wrists ached, but my heart felt weightless. As the guards pushed me into the waiting van, one of them, older, his eyes soft, leaned close and whispered, "Your mother lived long enough to name you." The world seemed to tilt. My breath caught. "What did you say?" But before I could ask again, the door slammed shut, the van roared to life, and for the first time I realized the truth wasn't done with me yet. When the people began to sing my name, it wasn't praise, it was grief turned into power. Their voices didn't rise for me. They rose for every forgotten name buried beneath years of silence, for every mother who wept without justice, for every child who vanished beneath the weight of their fear. The songs that once belonged to mourning became the rhythm of awakening, and that day, even the sky bent low to listen. The government thought my speech would die inside the courtroom walls, swallowed by iron bars and state silence. But words, once born from truth, travel like smoke, through vents, across borders, into hearts. Someone, perhaps one of the journalists who had once hidden in the crowd, had smuggled out the recording. Within hours, my voice was everywhere, through hacked radio signals, over markets, across factory floors. I didn't know it then, locked in a narrow cell where daylight came only in slivers. But outside, the country was changing. My name became a song the people whispered like prayer. My mark became their banner. The very streets that once trembled under soldiers' boots now pulsed with the heartbeat of thousands. The first protest began at dawn, small, silent, and full of fear. By noon, it had become a river of bodies flowing through the city. Old women waved white cloths from balconies. Students carried signs painted with the circle of fire. Farmers, teachers, and traders locked hands. Even the air felt different, thick with courage, trembling with the sound of drums that refused to stop. Through stolen frequencies, They played my trial speech again and again. My words were no longer mine. They belonged to them now, to every soul who had been told to kneel. "We are not the curse," they shouted. "We are the cure." The regime responded the only way fear knows how, with guns. Armored trucks rolled through the streets, soldiers in black masks standing ready. But when the order came to fire, no one moved. One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. Some dropped them entirely. One young officer knelt, his rifle clattering to the ground, and placed his marked wrist to his chest. "For the bloodline," he whispered. And in that single act, the spell of fear shattered. By nightfall, the capital had become a living sea of light. Torches, candles, and phones held high, their glow rippling through the city like a second sunrise. They broke into the state's broadcasting station, not to destroy, but to free the airwaves. A young woman's trembling voice announced, "The people have spoken. The era of silence ends tonight." From my cell, I could hear the echoes, faint at first, then swelling, filling the corridors with song. Even the guards stopped pretending not to listen. One of them, the same man who had whispered about my mother, unlocked my cell without a word and simply said, "Go. The country is waiting for you." The doors opened, and for the first time in my life, I walked out of captivity into the arms of freedom. The streets outside blazed with humanity. People reached out to touch me, not as a hero, but as a reminder of what they could be. The air was warm with sweat, tears, and firelight. Above the crowd, banners fluttered. Mbele, rebirth, truth lives. The same government buildings that had once been fortresses of oppression now bore the mark that once condemned me. And somewhere in the chaos, I heard the chant that made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. But I shook my head and raised my hands in silence. "Don't sing for me," I shouted through the noise. "Sing for the ones who didn't survive, for the ones who built this moment with their blood." They did. The chants changed, rising into the night like smoke that refused to fade. The revolution wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them. And as the corrupt leaders fled under the cover of darkness, the city finally exhaled after decades of holding its breath. When the dawn came, it wasn't red. It was gold, shimmering across faces lifted to the sky. The people stood hand in hand, no longer divided by fear. The sea, air smelled of dust, rain, and beginnings. That was when a young girl pressed through the crowd, small, barefoot, her eyes too old for her years. She slipped something into my hand before vanishing into the sea of people. I looked down and froze. It was a letter, sealed with wax, the same emblem my mother had once worn, the flower inside a ring of flame. My fingers trembled as I traced it. The paper was soft, old, stained by time, but the seal was fresh. Someone had written to me, and whoever it was, they knew the one truth I hadn't yet found. I was born from abandonment, but I became proof that even discarded lives can rebuild nations. The bush that once echoed my cries had turned into a memory, and the land that once cursed my name now spoke it like prayer. I had spent my life running from the fire, only to realize I was born to carry its light, not to destroy, but to warm the world that once left me in the cold. The years that followed were not gentle, but they were honest. The new dawn did not erase pain. It simply gave it purpose. I learned that freedom is not a moment. It is a lifetime of choosing to heal what history tried to forget. They called me Madame Zara, Mother of the Rebirth, but I never liked titles. I was not a saint, nor a savior. I was simply a survivor who refused to stay silent. My first act was not to build statues or memorials. It was to build schools. The first one stood on the same red soil where Mama Abeni's hut had once burned. A school for orphans, for children without names, for those who the world forgot to count. I named it the Abeni Home for the Lost and Found. Every child who entered received not a number, but a name and a story. We built slowly, brick by brick, laughter by laughter. Volunteers came from across the country. Some were once soldiers, others refugees. But all of them shared the same mark, invisible or not, the mark of endurance. The classroom smelled of chalk and mango leaves. The walls were painted in bright yellows and blues, the colors of dawn and sky. Sometimes, at dusk, I would stand beneath the acacia tree behind the building and feel the wind brushing my face, whispering through the leaves the same way my mother once whispered through dreams. I would close my eyes and hear her say, "Don't go as a king, go as a healer." And I would whisper back, "I did, Mama. I did." When the government finally called me to the capital for a national ceremony, I hesitated. They wanted to honor me as a hero of the Republic. The invitation was written on gold parchment, embossed with the emblem that once symbolized oppression, now redesigned with the flower of rebirth in its center. The hall was full of light that day. Leaders, children, and elders filled every seat. When my name was called, the applause rose like a wave. Powerful, beautiful, overwhelming. But I didn't walk forward for glory. I carried something in my hand, a small worn pendant, the same one my mother had left behind. When they handed me the medal, I raised it high and said, "This is not mine. It belongs to every soul who bled for this dawn, to Mama Abeni, who taught me that love is rebellion, to every child who learned to dream again, to every woman who carried strength in silence. Our story did not begin with power. It began with forgiveness." The hall fell quiet, the kind of silence that hums with tears too proud to fall. I placed the medal at the center of the stage and left before the applause could follow. Outside, the evening had turned soft, the air rich with the smell of rain and orange blossoms. I drove far, past the city lights, down the red road that led to the small hill by the market. The tree still stood there, older, wider, its roots gripping the earth like memory refusing to fade. At its base lay two graves, one for Mama Abeni, the other unmarked but known only to me. My mother, the woman whose truth had set the world on fire. I knelt, pressing my palm to the soil. "You both carried me when I had nothing," I whispered. "Now I carry you in everything I build." I took the pendant from around my neck, the last relic of a story written in pain, and laid it gently on the grave. "Rest now," I said. "Your fire is safe." The wind stirred, lifting dust and petals into the air, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter. Two voices, distant but familiar, echoing through the rustling grass. I rose, turning to leave, when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. I looked down. A little girl stood there, barefoot, her eyes wide and bright as dawn. She held out her arm, and on it, faint, almost glowing, was the same tribal mark that once cursed me into exile. "Auntie," she asked softly, "what does this mean?" I knelt, smiling through the tears that found me without permission. "It means," I whispered, "you're not alone. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who still believes pain only destroys, and remind them that pain can also rebuild. Comment below what part of Zara's journey spoke to your heart, because every voice adds strength to ours. Subscribe now and stay with us. More stories of courage, loss, and rebirth are waiting to find you.